This video is brought to you by the Ridge Wallet. More on them later. Nothing makes me feel older than realizing just how many of these videos I've made. I turned 25 this time last week in what was the 299th video of its type. And when I think I started this in 2011 at the age of 15 by talking about Metal Gear using my old phone to record my voice, I can feel the grey hair leaking out of my scalp. It's been a hell of a ride though. Never thought I'd get close to this many videos, especially because I thought I'd run out of topics after the first 50. But as it turns out, there's actually a lot to talk about when it comes to video games. Kinda puts the naysayers into perspective who think I'm running out of ideas, but maybe, just maybe, I'm running out of games to talk about? It's a weird thought that maybe I talk about some games a lot more than others, but trust me, I've been doing this long enough to pick up on all the times that people have noticed. So, why not pad out my stats further and give those people some angry catharsis? That could be a fun way to celebrate making 300 videos. Otherwise, I'll think about it too much and start having an existential crisis. Bit late for that, I reckon. I've never been very good at talking about myself because I always think that it isn't interesting enough for anyone to care. But I'll tell you what is interesting, having to carry around a large old wallet in your back pocket when the Ridge wallet exists. And this thing is light and durable enough to withstand a chainsaw. And that's really good because I can't tell you the number of wallets I've had to buy because they just can't handle it when I start practicing my chainsaw juggling. Finally, a solution! Most people are still using wallets designed decades ago, carrying around all sorts of receipts and crappy gift cards, and it's a bit strange that phones have got all stylish and streamlined, but wallets have stayed so archaic. The Ridge wallet can hold up to 12 cards with extra room for cash, and with over 30 colours and styles to choose from, you're very likely to find something that appeals to you. Plus, with a lifetime warranty, you can buy just the one wallet and carry it around with you for as long as you want, with a 45-day return window for a full refund if you don't love it. Get 10% off today with free worldwide shipping and returns by going to ridge.com/RabbidLuigi and using the code RabbidLuigi. That's ridge.com/RabbidLuigi with the code RabbidLuigi. It's time to move away from bulbous butt cheeks. Alright, sweet, let's talk about me. I like to pride myself on making interesting videos. Clearly I've lowered my standards this week, but usually I want to cover topics and talk about games that have some interesting qualities to them. Because that way, I'm not just layering compliments on top of each other for 15 to 20 minutes and actually making some content that people will want to watch, because the internet is full of cynical minds just like my own, and we love to pick apart a bad video game. Especially when it's a game as shockingly bad as Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. And I mean that in terms of Sonic 06 qualities being so awful that it is genuinely shocking that this game was allowed to leave the factory. If you ever want a discussion on the state of the games industry when it goes horribly wrong, then you can do a lot worse than default to Sonic 06. Fun times are guaranteed. I think part of my fixation on this game comes from barely believing that it exists. Seeing Sonic hit rock bottom might not sound too wild in 2020, but 2006 was a more optimistic time, where this game was supposed to bring in a next-gen Sonic experience like no other. The reality is harsh and incomprehensibly glitchy, but it's kind of incredible how this game toys with expectation by slapping down any vague hopes that Sega and Sonic Team had their shit together in the mid-2000s. There's the point and laugh appeal to Sonic 06 that does have plenty of mileage, but it also works as a representation of the danger of rushing video games and not doing enough quality assurance before your game is released to the general public, who rip it apart like ravenous piranhas. Much of this game could have been different if it had more time, but you'd need a whole new set of writers to fix a story this bad, but hey, it sure has been entertaining to dissect over the years. Thanks for always being interesting, Sega. If you've ever spent any time on the internet at all, you'll know that people tend to gravitate towards negative topics, and I wonder how much of that is to do with wanting to see something not function as it's supposed to. Sonic 06 is trying to be a functional video game, but you can't even tell what one of those is supposed to look like until you see the complete opposite, and suddenly every game looks like a masterpiece compared to Sonic's brief next-gen train wreck. But thankfully, Sega were able to take on board the criticisms and Sonic's never been this bad ever again, hasn't it? Yeah. You'd imagine that a game that I talk about a lot is also one that I play a lot too, and sure, this works out sometimes, but a good work-play balance isn't so easy to come by all the time on YouTube. You know, I talk about games for a meager living, and I have to set some time aside to play games for a hobby, and there isn't a ton of value in racking up hundreds of hours on just one game. Not to say that I haven't done it before, it's just, you know, not so much recently. Perhaps an easier way of explaining my approach to games is the difference between playing a game to stay informed on what's new and trendy with the kids, and playing a game when I need a break from making a video. No one's playing Overwatch anymore, but I like playing a few rounds of Mystery Heroes from time to time just for a bit of fun. Team Fortress 2 was another go-to for a while until Valve abandoned it, leading to some heavy hours clocked and a handful of videos dedicated to it. And at roughly the same time as I stopped playing TF2, The Binding of Isaac roared into pole position. Easy to see why, because while it isn't an online shooter, Isaac is a procedurally generated roguelike, where every playthrough has the potential to be very different from any other playthrough, and so replayability is encouraged in order to unlock all of the various things that make subsequent runs longer and more dangerous. Those 600 hours must have come from somewhere, right? The Binding of Isaac, specifically the Rebirth remake, is a very easy game to play and talk about. It's got that sweet indie appeal, so I don't have to get too cozy with a massive AAA developer in order to enjoy it, but coming from the mind of Edmund McMillan, who also made Super Meat Boy, not only does it have the cutesy disturbing charm to it, where there's walking vaginas that vomit blood that are still drawn to be cartoony and not all that threatening, but the game got so much support after it came out, both officially in the form of numerous DLC packs, and unofficially with all the fan-made mods. Every time I play this game, something different happens, whether it's unlocking a new character, or having fun with an overpowered set of items, or reaching a new ending where Isaac reminds everyone that if you're enjoying this video and want to see more, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications of every new video, because YouTube is driven by numbers and I'm a slave to an ever-changing algorithm that doesn't really know what it wants. Please don't hate me. I've talked about The Binding of Isaac so much and for so long because it held my attention for an above average period of time, and even though I don't play it as much these days, I still know that there's so much to unpack that I haven't even covered in a video yet. You wait until I open up that lore a bit more, you'll never be the same again. Those special months are fun, aren't they? I don't do them very often, but sometimes I'll take some time out to focus my attention on a specific franchise that I feel has a lot of potential for making videos about, because there's just so much to talk about, and this way I can knock out a bunch of similar videos in a row. Lots of fun to make, and if there's a fun game coming out this year, I'll probably do another one based on that franchise. However, these months aren't reflected too well in any one game getting any special treatment, because they all get absorbed under the same franchise. It's hard to talk about one game a lot when you're actually talking about half a dozen games a lot. So even though I've given Pokemon and The Legend of Zelda their own months on two separate occasions, there's really only one game between both franchises that I've given any special attention to, and for once, it isn't Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. There was definitely a time when I couldn't stop shoehorning that game into every video, but for actual discussions, we're gonna have to move to Majora's Mask. Maybe not a game I talk about all that often nowadays, but for a spell a few years ago, it was the only game around. Just couldn't help myself, could I? As far as Zelda games go, Majora's Mask has the most extracurricular reading, or in other words, there's a lot more happening under the surface than in your average Zelda. Ocarina of Time has some deeply depressing undertones hidden deep down if you're willing to search for them, but Majora's Mask is a bit more forthright with what kind of game it wants to be. The tricky sequel to one of the most influential games of all time for sure, but to do so with a flagrant disregard for outdoing its older brother in favour of telling a more emotionally complex tale about how people react to the end of the world and one boy's quest to cleanse the land that takes him to some bizarre locations to meet some very colourful characters and all their problems. Not my favourite Zelda game because I think Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild are better in a number of ways, but a game that I've had a slow, gradual appreciation of over the years as themes and dynamics within the game begin to resonate with me more as I got older. Naturally, it fits in with lots of videos that I've made in the past, although not so much recently. Whether that's just an inbuilt sense that I'm talking about it too much, or the fact that I'm talking about slightly more optimistic topics, it's hard to say. Maybe the well has finally run dry. Is it a bit strange that up until this point, none of these games are what I would consider among my favourites? I suppose Majora's Mask is up there among my favourite Zelda games, and I have plenty of time for The Binding of Isaac, but if I was to make that list tomorrow, neither of them would feature. Not sure what that says about the focus of my videos and if I prefer discussing imperfect games with as many flaws as qualities, but the slight anomaly is that I sure do like talking about Metal Gear. Like, it's no secret at all that Metal Gear has been a big part of this channel since day one, and that's because I kind of love everything that it does, even when it's stupid and convoluted, as long as it's not too stupid. You won't always have a great time with these games, but it will never be boring, and that makes some good material to make videos about, and considering that it is my favourite franchise and home to my all-time favourite video game, it's no surprise to anyone that I've talked about Metal Gear Solid 3 so much. I mean, if you had your own YouTube channel, you might already, wouldn't you share your favourite game and all the amazing things that it does with anyone out there who might want to listen? I'm sure there's some people out there. Hello? Unlike a lot of other games that I talk about on the show, Metal Gear Solid 3 was not a childhood game for me, because my parents ran things by the book, and a game that came out when I was 9 was rated M for mature, and I never stood a chance. But it meant that I got to catch up with the game when I was older, along with the rest of the franchise, and, you know, the rest is history. But the third game stuck with me for a long time afterwards, and I think I know why. Metal Gear gets a bad reputation for being too complicated and too circle-jerky. That's a fun word, it's like a circle made of dried meat, which is surprisingly accurate. But Metal Gear is a franchise that loves itself and the intricate yarns that it spins from one game to the next. A game like MGS4 is like diving into the ocean with a cinder block tethered to your ankle, since you fail an uphill battle trying to understand so many developed plot threads that you're only now hearing for the first time. Snake Eater is different though, because as the first entry in its chronology, things are far less tangled, and this Metal Gear game is actually able to tell a relatively straightforward story where plot twists aren't completely ridiculous and emotional moments aren't undercut by strange directing decisions. And it's just the purest Metal Gear game you could ever wish for, complete with an open style of sneaking past bad guys that will provide plenty of inspiration for MGS5 much later. You can trace a lot of the franchise's best qualities to this game, as well as the contents of many of my previous videos, and I for one am grateful that MGS3's qualities haven't been tainted by the direction that Konami have chosen to take the series in. Well, apart from the patch slot that perfectly recreates some of the most important cutscenes in the game with high-end graphics. Can't deny, that hurts a bit. I'll probably find a way to talk about that in a future video, who knows? Plenty of evidence to support that. Well, no prizes for guessing this one. I'm sure if you had enough free time to tally up every game that I've ever talked about, you get some revealing results. And there is a Google Doc about this that was updated recently that I'll leave a link to in the description. But looking through this, I am surprised as anyone that I've talked about Spec Ops for Line just the 10 times. Could have sworn it was more than that, but to be fair, the first time I mentioned the game was in 2015, and further mentions have come roughly twice a year since then, so it all checks out. I think the reason why it feels like I talk about Spec Ops more often than I do is because of how I talk about it. It's not the sort of game you bring up when you're talking about how funny video games can be, or how goofy some voice acting is, because the entire premise of Spec Ops for Line is to tear apart your preconceived assumptions of shooter games, and games in general. With material so heavy, why wouldn't I talk about it all the time? Spec Ops for Line stayed with me for quite a while after I'd finished playing it, and you can find reasons why all throughout its laser-focused narrative. This is a game that isn't interested in stroking your ego through giving you waves of irredeemable bad guys to mow down, because Spec Ops sets its sights on a less worn path of self-reflection and why we play video games in the first place. What starts out as a standard over-the-shoulder bro shooter where you liberate a foreign country by shooting the bad guys quickly dissolves into an artificial fantasy where both the main character and the player keep playing in order to somehow fix their own mistakes and defeat the final boss to save the day, but it isn't that simple. Yes, Spec Ops forces you to commit its biggest atrocity only to lambaste you for killing civilians, but I always like the argument that if you don't deserve criticism for having no choice in Spec Ops, then you don't deserve any praise for having no choice in Call of Duty. Player agency is something that I'm fascinated by, and I can honestly talk about Spec Ops for hours given the chance. Just be lucky it's only twice a year. This is RabbidLuigi, and I still find it weird that statistically, I haven't really talked about Spec Ops for Line as much as other games, but maybe that's just a sign that I need to talk about it more often. Would people stick around for 300 odd more videos if this became the Spec Ops lack of variety hour? Or maybe I just need to play another game that forces me to do terrible things and calls me out on it. Only then does The Last of Us Part 2 have any value. So, what topic would you like to see me cover next? Leave your suggestion in a comment on this video because I'll be taking the best ideas and making a poll on my community tab, which you can then vote on to decide what the next video is about. I'll be announcing the winner of the poll over on my Twitter, so make sure you follow me so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.